The mind makes you rich, even in exile. How did the Stoics react to adversity? 3 of our 4 protagonists had been exiled at least once. They took it in exemplary Stoic manner. Seneca said, "It is the mind that makes us rich. This goes with us into exile." Musonius Rufus, who was exiled to the worst of all places, Gyara, said that exile deprived him of his country, but not of his ability to endure exile. He even said that exile doesn't deprive a person of anything of value. Virtue cannot be taken away. Exile doesn't prevent you from being courageous and just. We must keep in mind that happiness depends more on what we make of what happens, rather than what happens in the first place. No matter what happens to you, your mind is always available to turn it into good fortune by responding with virtue. The Stoic sage, and apparently also the main philosophers, are absolutely free even in exile, because their freedom consists in being able to follow their reasonable nature, which is to focus on what you control, take the rest as it happens, and respond with virtue. Every obstacle becomes an opportunity to practice wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. The ideal Stoic only wants to respond to whatever happens in harmony with reason and his highest self, and nothing can prevent him from doing that. He only desires what's within his control, and therefore he remains free, even in exile or prison. Stoicism challenges you to change yourself whenever you can't change the situation. Even if you can't change the situation, you have the power to change your attitude about it and respond with virtue. No matter where you are, prison or palace, and no matter what challenge you're facing, dog shit or $10 bill, your freedom of choice will always be available to you. You just need to spot your first impression. Avoid shitting a brick, take a step back instead. Evaluate the situation and choose your wisest response. External events are not what matters, but what you choose to do with them. By the way, this is far from easy to realize as long as people respond impulsively and therefore mindlessly to events, because it seems obvious to them that the event causes their unhappiness. As soon as they get better at stepping back from their initial impressions, they'll see that what upsets them is their very own judgment about the situation. The first lesson, then, is to never blame other people or outside events for whatever negative emotions we're feeling. Take responsibility. For the Stoics, it's clear that not events but our opinions about those events are the cause of a troubled mind. This might show as suffering and unhappiness, and arises when we believe the stories we tell ourselves. An impression comes as a thought into our heads and we accept it as the truth. I'm in exile. This is terrible. The situation itself, exile, does not make us unhappy. It may cause physical pain in certain situations, but it's the story about the situation, it's terrible, that causes the trouble. Your judgments in form of thoughts, opinions, and interpretations make you unhappy. Good or bad can only be found in your judgments and actions, not in external events. The troubled mind comes from judging an event as undesirable or bad, often in the form of complaining. We give an event value by judging it as terrible, for example, and forget that the event itself is neither good nor bad. It is empty and carries no meaning at all. We give it the meaning by judging, resenting, and wanting it to be different. This causes the emotional suffering. If you could let it be as it is, if you were able not to judge it good or bad but take it as it is, neutral and different, then you wouldn't have a troubled mind. You are free of suffering, says Epictetus, if you don't care for the things which are not in your power. The events themselves carry no meaning. It's our judgments that make them either good or bad. I like how Ellie Goulding sings in her song First Time, the middle finger was our peace sign. When you think about it this way, "R, such a jerk," can easily become a smile and, "Aw, such a sweetie." The exact same event can be interpreted in so many different ways and arouse complete opposite feelings. Look, I know you're not stupid and know very well what the other person is trying to tell you. The point is, it doesn't matter what he's trying to tell you. What matters is what you make out of it. So even if it seems, or it's obvious, that someone is trying to insult you, it's your judgment that provokes you. You cannot be harmed unless you let it. The Stoic Happiness Triangle 85, because the other person has no access to your mind. Otherwise, Marcus Aurelius says, my neighbor's wickedness would be my own harm, and this was not in God's intention to leave my misfortune up to another. Only you yourself have access to your mind, and only you can ruin your life. You're responsible. Someone can't frustrate you, dog shit can't make you depressed. These are external events that have no access to your mind. Those emotions you feel, as real as they are, don't come from the outside, but from the inside. You generate those emotions. You generate your pain. A broken glass is a broken glass. It's your judgment. Duh, I'm so clumsy. That makes you feel like a loser. Don't blame the event. Blame your reactive self for feeling how you feel. The cause lies in your judgment. Remove the judgment, Marcus says, and the hurt itself is removed. Don't judge the event, and you won't get harmed. Your reaction, then, basically shows whether you've been harmed or not. When you break a glass, this gives you plenty of power because it means you cannot get upset by anything outside your control. Only your judgment can harm you. No matter what uncontrollable challenges you're facing in life, you have the power to decide what these events mean to you. Only you have the freedom to. Happiness seems pretty doable, right? For the Stoics, it only consists in how we respond to events and what we make of them. Aligning our actions with virtue is sufficient but also necessary for the happy and smoothly flowing life. So what happens? Why don't we all get there with a snap of the fingers? You have two options: get hurt or don't get hurt.
And hide. Things are tougher than we thought, and they happen differently than we expected and wished for, and we're struggling to deal with them effectively, or even to accept them in the first place. But wait. Stoicism teaches that external events do not matter, and that we must get any good from ourselves. It only seems that life gets in the way. In reality, it's our negative emotions that get in the way. These intense emotions conquer our mind, actually our whole being, make it impossible to think clearly, and urge us to do the opposite of what we think is right. Once our mind has been captured by negative emotions, or passions as the Stoics call them, such as irrational fear, grief, anger, or greed, these passions take over, and we react impulsively without being able to think about it. As Seneca says in the opening lines to this chapter, once the enemy has entered the mind, reason is gone. It's one or the other, reason or passion. When passion is at the steering wheel, reason is tied up and gagged in the trunk. Negative emotions naturally feel bad. Think of grief, fear, jealousy, or strong cravings. So with the emotion in the driver's seat, and with something inside feeling bad, our number one priority, unconsciously, becomes to feel better, and we automatically seek relief of the pain we're feeling. The negative emotion orders us to do what makes us feel better, and relieve the pain in the present moment, regardless of our values and long-term goals. We end up pushing aside our deep values, and instead, walk away like a coward. Order pizza and tiramisu. Binge watch Marvel movies. Smash doors and glasses. Shout at our friends and kids and buy those black high heels we don't need. Negative emotions can take countless forms. They can swallow us completely, like intense anger, which creates a sudden tunnel vision that simply lets us act out. Bam. And it's happened. They can be much calmer, like excessive grief, which can leave us full of self-pity, depressive thoughts, and complete inaction. Or they can be very subtle, like just not feeling like it, which can stem from different emotions and causes us simply to not do what we know we should be doing. When I was a teenager, a friend of mine got beaten up by another guy from school. Other kids and I were watching, and I knew it would be right to help, but something inside was holding me back. I didn't feel like helping. I was,
afraid. The emotion won. Or all the times I saw some beautiful girl in a bar and wanted to say hello, but at the same time I didn't feel like it. I was afraid. The emotion won most times. Of course, I had some great excuses. She wasn't that pretty. I just wasn't in the mood. I was there for the good time with the lads and so on. It doesn't really matter which emotions get in the way. For me, it's obviously fear in many cases. I'm working on it. For you, it might be anger, greed, resentment, or pride. The problem with these emotions is not that they exist, but that they overwhelm us so that we end up doing the opposite of what we ought to do. And as we learned earlier, our rational actions are at the root of our happiness. Therefore, we can't live a happy life when we let strong emotional disturbances dictate our actions. The Stoics believed that such passions are toxic to the good life and cause misery for many people. The majority of us are enslaved by these emotions. We too often act according to our emotions instead of our values. So the Stoics want us to overcome these irrational fears and desires so that we're able to act according to virtue and attain true happiness. Also, oftentimes, these emotions are against our rational nature as they ignore what is truly good. When I'm afraid to say hello to some girl, this fear and my inaction goes completely against virtue. It's unwise and irrational to fear what's not dangerous. It lacks self-discipline for not overcoming the inner resistance, and it's simply cowardly. It's essential to overcome these negative emotions if we want to practice Stoicism. This is why a key part of the Stoic philosophy is to prevent the onset of negative emotions and to be prepared to deal with them effectively and not get overwhelmed if they arise nevertheless, and they will. So what's the secret? There's not really a secret, sorry. However, there are specific practices that'll help you prepare for challenging situations. These practices are covered in the second part of this book. After a quick side note, we'll look at the two main reasons why negative emotions conquer us in the first place. When we can minimize these two, then attention. Our human brain is built for survival, not thriving. Our ancestors' main goals were to survive and replicate. Food and water were scarce, and there were many dangers, so they were constantly on the lookout for dangerous animals and rival clans. That's why our brains developed a negativity bias. If they got caught by surprise by a wolf, they were dead. On the other hand, if they missed an opportunity for food, they still had another chance. So it was more important to focus on the negative rather than the positive. And today, we still have these same brains, constantly checking if what's happening around us is dangerous. Because of our evolution, we see obstacles much better than opportunities. It's in our nature to worry about health, wealth, and social status. It seems we need those for survival. Therefore, we automatically compare ourselves to others, focus on possible dangers, and chase more and more stuff. So don't worry if you think you're always negative, that's normal. That's just the built-in negativity bias of our brain. However, that's highly counterproductive in the modern world as, after all, we're very safe and have enough food. Therefore, survival can be ticked off for the most part. Nothing is going to attack you at night, and no rival clan will burn down your hut. The point is, these negative emotions get in the way, and we must try to minimize them and the effects they have on our lives. Let's now look at the two main reasons why we get overwhelmed by negative emotions. Passion is produced no otherwise than by a disappointment of one's desires. Epictetus makes the point that negative emotions arise when we don't get what we want. This disappointment is the spring of sorrow, lamentation, and envy. This renders us envious and emulous, and incapable of hearing reason. Attention. Our human brain is built for survival, not thriving. Our ancestors' main goals were to survive and replicate. Food and water were scarce, and there were many dangers, so they were constantly on the lookout for dangerous animals and rival clans. That's why our brains developed a negativity bias. If they got caught by surprise by a wolf, they were dead. On the other hand, if they missed an opportunity for food, they still had another chance. So it was more important to focus on the negative rather than the positive. And today we still have these same brains, constantly checking if what's happening around us is dangerous. Because of our evolution, we see obstacles much better than opportunities. It's in our nature to worry about health, wealth, and social status. It seems we need those for survival. Therefore, we automatically compare ourselves to others, focus on possible dangers, and chase more and more stuff. So don't worry if you think you're always negative, that's normal. That's just the built-in negativity bias of our brain. However, that's highly counterproductive in the modern world as, after all, we're very safe and have enough food. Therefore, survival can be ticked off for the most part. Nothing is going to attack you at night, and no rival clan will burn down your hut. The point is, these negative emotions get in the way, and we must try to minimize them and the effects they have on our lives. Let's now look at the two main reasons why we get overwhelmed by negative emotions. Passion is produced no otherwise than by a disappointment of one's desires. Epictetus makes the point that negative emotions arise when we don't get what we want. This disappointment is the spring of sorrow, lamentation, and envy. This renders us envious and emulous, and incapable of hearing reason. Basically, negative emotions come from wanting and fearing what's not under our control. As we learned earlier, the root cause of our suffering stems from worrying about stuff outside our control. These are faulty value judgments. We value some indifferent external thing as good or bad. For example, mistakenly judging material things as good or desirable is the cause of cravings for wealth and pleasure. Such strong craving is a negative emotion that takes over the steering wheel and lets us do whatever satisfies the craving for the moment, regardless of our values. Because we're incapable to hear reason. Remember, reason is tied up and gagged in the trunk. Faulty value judgments also work the other way around. We mistakenly judge some indifferent external event such as rain, annoying people, or poverty as bad, or even terrible. And this wrong judgment about the event causes anger or fear. So it's the wrong judgment about an event that causes the negative emotions, and these emotions, again, get in the way of a happy life, because they let us act impulsively rather than rationally. Donald Robertson says it well in his book, Stoicism and the Art of Happiness. The majority of ordinary people lack fulfillment and peace of mind because their values are confused and internally conflicted. We waste our lives chasing after an illusion of happiness, based on a mixture of the villain. Negative emotions get in the way. 93 Hedonism, materialism, and egotism, crazy, self-defeating values absorbed from the foolish world around us. We desire and fear external things beyond our direct control. We naively judge indifferent things such as health, wealth, and reputation as good and even necessary for the happy life. And we also judge sickness, poverty, and ridicule as bad and hindering to the happy life. These desires and fears about external things are a bright blinking warning sign that says, "You forgot the basics. Go back and ingrain the core beliefs." In other words, we haven't yet second-natured the basic Stoic principles that virtue is the only true good, that what's not within our control is ultimately indifferent, and that we are solely responsible for our flourishing. As long as we feel that things happen for or against us, that dog shit makes a miserable day, and a bonus makes a happy one. As long as we're afraid of not getting what we want and feel bad about not getting it, we're only a puppet to our emotions, caused by faulty judgments about what's truly good and bad. You are silly, Epictetus says, if you would have the things which are not in your power to be in your power, and the things which belong to others to be yours. If we could carefully separate between the things which are up to us and the things which are not, and focus on those up to us and let the rest happen as it will, then we'd get much less jerked around by the negative emotions caused by faulty judgments. However, even if we set out to do exactly that, there's something else that often gets in the way: unconsciousness. We're not aware enough in situations and forget to focus on what we can control. Instead, we get carried away by our initial impressions and will only realize later that do you remember that the Stoics want us to pay massive attention to our every action, just like when we're paying attention not to stand on bits of broken glass? Well, guess what happens when we don't bring such attention into challenging situations? We get carried away by our first impressions without being able to check them. These first impressions are like tendencies to act a certain way, but when we're aware enough, we can step in and choose our best response, which is most certainly different to the first impression. Here's an example that happened to me when I took a toilet break. I got up from my writing chair, walked to the toilet, when the new pack of toilet paper on the flushing tank caught my attention. I bought it yesterday when I did my grocery shopping, and it was necessary to do so. After seeing it, my mind immediately went, "Yeah, you did very well buying it." Niels, my brother I live with, didn't even notice. No signs of gratitude and so on. Feelings of light anger and unease started to arise within, and my mind went on rationalizing itself. Well, he did say thank you for buying the groceries, and he does many other things in the household and so on. Fortunately, I was aware enough to recognize this thought pattern, stepped in, and called it off as classic ego wants recognition mind battle. The negative feelings were gone in the blink of an eye. What happened exactly? The situation new toilet paper caused an automatic first impression of such and such is bad, with a tendency toward getting angry. Thankfully, I was aware enough, recognized it, and could call it off immediately. If it would have been a more challenging situation, then I'd have been able to use reason, or just cold hard logic and look at the situation objectively. I'd have said to myself that doing the right thing is enough. It's a reward in itself, and doesn't need recognition from someone else. Now, if I'd been unaware of that irrational impression, I'd have gotten angry and frustrated and entered my brother's room and kicked him in the face. Or, more likely, the negative impression would have carried me away and I would have been lost in thought for a time, while being irrationally angry with my brother. That's why unawareness is so dangerous. While being unaware, we can't observe and recognize our first impressions and would mindlessly follow along. As Epictetus says, when you have let your mind loose, it is no longer in your power to recall it, either to propriety or to modesty or to moderation, but you do everything that comes into your mind in obedience to your inclinations. That's exactly what we learned earlier. Once passion has taken over, we obey like a dog that smells sausage. Reason can shout and whistle her lungs out, but we can't hear her because we're completely absorbed by passion's sausage. Look, one could argue that the reason for the negative emotions to take over even in this case is the faulty judgment, not the unawareness. The emotions arise because of the irrational judgment that my brother is ungrateful. However, one could also argue that many faulty judgments happen because we're not aware enough in the first place. We're not aware of our every step and end up in dog shit. Or my mom isn't aware enough to know how much of her cup of coffee she's already drank, so she ends up wondering, who drank my coffee? Sure, she might value coffee too highly. Is that even possible? But the reason behind that faulty judgment is her unawareness while drinking it herself. In most cases, sorry mom, sometimes I took a sip or two. The point is, being aware will reduce the times we get taken over by negative emotions. This is important because getting taken over by negative emotions is exactly what hinders us from taking the right actions and getting the good life. Remember, for the Stoics, the only good lies in our voluntary actions, and our actions can only be voluntary when we're bringing awareness into every moment. If we lack that awareness, we permit ourselves to get carried away and let our actions become shameful and disregardful, to use Epictetus's words. Only by bringing awareness into the moment, we can properly confront the challenge of accepting external events with equanimity, while cultivating wisdom, justice, and self-discipline in our reactions. With that awareness, we can try to follow Epictetus's advice to endure and renounce in everyday situations. We should endure what we irrationally fear and dislike with courage and perseverance. 2. We should renounce or abstain from what we irrationally crave through discretion and self-discipline. We definitely need awareness to detect irrational fears and cravings before we can endure them with courage and perseverance, or abstain from them with discretion and self-discipline. Awareness, however, won't be enough. Not everybody can stare fear in the eyes and do it anyway. I often can't. Even if I'm aware enough to recognize my fear while knowing the fear is irrational, and it would be the wise thing to act despite the fear, the emotion often beats my courage. Another example is the battle between an irrational desire and self-discipline. After a long day of work and persevering with my tasks, I observe the desire to check some news. I'm well aware of the battle between the pleasurable desire and my, congratulations, you made it through the theory part. It's time to get in the water. Beware though, just because we're fluent in the classroom doesn't mean we're ready for the real world. Knowing the theory and applying it in practice are two entirely different animals. You are going to get wet, or as Epictetus puts it, we might get miserably shipwrecked. That's why we must practice. He says a carpenter becomes a carpenter by learning certain things. and a helmsman becomes a helmsman by learning certain things. So it's clear that if we want to become good people, we must learn certain things. Step forward, he says, and make use of what you've learned. It isn't more logic chopping that is needed. Our Stoic texts are full of that. What we need now are people to apply their learning and bear witness to their learning in their actions. Please be the one to take on this character. I am tired in my teaching of invoking examples from the past. I want to be able to hold up an example from my time. Be the example out there. Don't be satisfied with mere learning, but practice, practice, practice. Because if time passes, Epictetus says, we forget what we've learned and end up doing the opposite, and hold opinions the opposite of what we should. Sorry to bring it to you, but you're not Superman. You can't just hear Stoic principles once and expect to rely on them when life happens. You must practice like a professional athlete and show up on the pitch every day. Show up earlier and leave later than everyone else. From nothing comes nothing. Remember, philosophy is all about how to live one's life. As discussed earlier, Epictetus compares philosophy to artisans. Just as the carpenter uses wood and the sculptor uses bronze, we use our own lives as the raw material in the art of living. Every event in our lives presents a blank block of marble that we can train on. That's how we learn to use a chisel and mallet until we've mastered our craft. Philosophy is all about applying its principles to the real world. Remember, we want to be warrior philosophers and put into practice what we learn. That's what this part is all about. You'll find 55 Stoic practices mixed with practical advice. Each can be used by itself. For simplicity reasons, let's differentiate between 3 sorts of practices. The first are preparing practices you can do for yourself. You won't need a life situation to train on, and you can simply do them at home. The second are, what would have become of legendary Hercules without any struggles? Obviously, Epictetus says, he would have just rolled over in bed and gone back to sleep. So by snoring his life away in luxury and comfort, he never would have developed into the mighty Hercules. What would have become of any person you admire without any struggles? Your mom? That colleague you rate so highly? Roger Federer or any other superstar? One thing is sure, they wouldn't be where they are without the challenges they surely faced in their lives. Difficulties are important. That's what we're here for. God, says Seneca, does not make a spoiled pet of a good man. He tests him, hardens him, and fits him for his own service. All the adversities you're facing in your life, these are tests. It's mere training. Life isn't supposed to be easy. Life is supposed to be challenging to make sure you actually grow. And those things which we all shudder and tremble at are for the good of the persons themselves to whom they come, says Seneca. Whenever you find yourself in a hole, remind yourself of Hercules, who became strong only because of the challenges he faced. Life is meant to be hard at times. Chin up, chest out, you'll do fine. Now let's look at 3 helpful details that'll help you get the most out of the practices. Stoicism isn't an easy-to-follow road. There are many principles to keep in mind and to live by. And the most important prerequisite is to be aware of what's going on. Because Stoic philosophy is a lot about how we react to what happens in the world around us. What happens doesn't matter because it's beyond our control. What matters is how we deal with it. In order to deal with what happens effectively and to be mindful of our reactions, we need to be aware of what's going on. We need to be able to step in between stimulus and response. We need to be able to not go with our impulses but take a step back and look at the situation objectively. Stoicism requires us to be able to not react impulsively to what happens to us. It requires us to spot our initial impressions so that we recognize our ability to choose our response. Once we're able to spot our automatic impressions, we can test them and actively choose to go with the impression or not. Look, awareness is the first step toward any serious change. If you're not aware of what's going wrong in your life, then how do you want to fix it? If you don't realize when you get angry, how do you want to prevent it in the future? A consciousness of wrongdoing is the first step to salvation, Seneca says. You have to catch yourself doing it before you can correct it. Stoicism asks of us to be aware of what we do in every moment. The whole idea of virtue to express our highest self in every moment, is based on our ability to be present in the moment and know what's going on. How else do we want to choose our best action? Our voluntary thoughts and actions are by definition the only things within our control, and they only exist in the here and now. We can't choose an action if we're lost in thought, ruminating in the past, or dreaming about the future. Therefore, we should focus our attention on the present moment, undistracted by the past or future. Then we can properly confront the challenge we're facing now, trying to accept it as it is, and choose a response consistent with our values. Basically, we should be aware of our every step. As said earlier, we should watch ourselves like a hawk and bring the same attention into the moment as when we're walking barefoot on broken glass. This focused and continuous self-observation is needed to practice Stoicism effectively. If you think you're not a very mindful person, you're still able to practice most of the following practices. Plus, many will actually improve your mindfulness. This cultivation of awareness is a part of Stoicism. You'll get better at stepping back from your impulses so you can analyze them and question their accuracy, and then decide upon your smartest response. Practicing Stoicism isn't like watching TV. It takes effort. You must actually do something. Most practices require self-discipline if you want to do them. Some are challenging, not particularly fun, and will suck up your willpower. But that's part of the game, and it's similar with other things in life. If you want to get better at